is it important to understand religious tradition and sexual violence and find a better way? I'm here with Samira Qureshi from heartwomenandgirls.org, and I'm Kathy Vartuli from theintimacydojo.com. And Samira, you'll be talking at the Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit in almost a month on religious tradition and sexual violence, moving from a framework of oppression to one of empowerment. And could you tell us why that topic is important to you and why you decided to share that there?
Sure. I'm sure it seems like a very unique title for a workshop presentation.
Well, it's very intriguing. I'm like, tell me more.
So, we've been around for about 8 years, and we have 3 staff, and during our own journeys of doing this work with Muslim women and with Muslim communities, we found that faith, sexual health, and health can't be separated out. And that's the same for a lot of, I think, faith traditions, whether you're Catholic, Buddhist, Jewish, or Muslim, or any other faith. When you practice from a religious-based perspective, health and sexual health is intertwined with that. Mm-hmm. And then, as we've noticed with political climates and the media, especially around Muslim and those who are being othered, yes. There's a great deal of misunderstanding, oppression, and biases that a lot of non-Muslim folks have towards Muslims. So it puts a lot of extra strain on already minority communities who are trying to access sexual health and sexual violence services.
And it's so hard to begin with. It's like there's so much shame, and then add that on top, it seems impossible.
Right. And so we've noticed doing the work that if professionals are coming from a religiously and culturally informed perspective, they're met much more easier from the Muslim community with regards to building trust and really understanding the intersections that come into play with sexual violence, including religion, which is one of them, and hate crimes, for example, and Islamophobia. There's a lot of intersections that come with seeking sexual health information and resources.
Well, there is so much Islamophobia. Like, even people that I've always seen as very open and curious, mm-hmm. People I've been close to my entire life, they come out with I'm like, what? Like, very fearful, and I think that's I think there's probably 1% of every religion and culture is a little bit is extreme, mm-hmm. and the rest of us are all just trying to get by and figure out how to do our best. And when we other people like that, it's so hard. Could you give us an example of a religious tradition from the Muslims that you would be important to incorporate as you're educating?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, Kathy, is to see Islam as being sex positive. Yeah. And I would say a lot of folks who don't understand Islam would say the opposite, that it's sexually oppressive.
Right.
Especially with regards to women, girls, and expressing sexuality. There's a lot of misunderstanding about modesty, sexual purity, and understanding the faith. But as you dig deeper into Islam and look at the Holy Book and the teachings, it's incredibly sex positive. Mm-hmm. So during a lot of workshops, we'll bring up texts and verses from the Quran that really explain what it means to be a sexual being from a religious perspective. So that's the part where I think practitioners find really fascinating, mm-hmm. is that when you listen to Muslims talk about sexuality and religion, then you'll get the real picture in an empowering way, instead of from the outside when it's myth-ridden and incorrect most of the time.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of, especially Western cultures, we've seen some movies maybe that were probably not very accurate, written by Westerners and just perpetuating, like you said, myths about how people interact. And are you using this, I love that, reducing sexual violence is so important in educating people. How are you using this? You have your website, you work with women and girls and help them with that?
Yeah, so we take a developmental approach. So we have curriculum and programs from kids ranging all the way up to older adults, married couples. Yeah. And so we call ourselves religiously and culturally informed. Mm-hmm. And we also don't solely work with women and girls. That was how we kind of came about initially doing sex ed work. Yeah. But as you know, with sex education comes sexual violence disclosures. Yeah. And really, to get to the root of sexual violence, you have to do prevention with those who could perpetrate, which are mostly men and boys.
Yeah.
And so we're shifting our work to do more comprehensive sex ed and I'm using gender binaries, very aware, but across all folks of different developmental stages. So we will teach kids about their bodies at age 5 or 6 and give them parents religious reasons why, for example, all the way up to puberty and adolescence, and then those who are preparing to be intimate at whatever stage they decide to do that. We kind of take religion and bring it to a developmental, practical level.
I love that. That's beautiful. I remember myself, like, outside of religious or culture, but like, I remember being very curious and also very confused and shamed because I had a sexual abuse history, but like wanting to know more, but there was no access to it. There was no place. There was lots of gossip, and we were 7th grade girls whispering to each other and sharing a lot of misinformation. So letting people understand their own bodies is just very empowering, and it lets them feel more secure in themselves.
Absolutely, and being able to get it from, like you said, the accurate source, and being able to see women and also boys just feel empowered when they get the information. I almost feel like they're given more agency. They get more empowerment to be able to go out and even talk to health practitioners about their bodies, let alone their families and their potential partners. So it's incredibly empowering from the self first, and then shared with other individuals.
Yeah, that's wonderful. When did you start this program?
So Heart was founded in 2009 or 2010 in Chicago. Nadia Mohajir is the founder and the executive director. I joined a few years after that, but she was working with the city of Chicago within the public health field and realized that there was a lack of information for Muslim women and girls, and actually created a project out of that through her work. And the reception was so great that it kind of led her to form this nonprofit. So it started as a volunteer-run organization in Chicago 8 years ago, and now we are a national team with 3 full-time staff and about 30 trainers across the country.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it's what we call a labor of love, which I think this work can be, as I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah.
And so we've been really blessed with opportunities and more funding, and now we're able to spread our work a lot more.
I love it. And actually, I think that a lot of times, because it's so hard, a lot of people are fighting just to not do abstinence-only education, like we're fighting just to get education out there, that I haven't heard a lot of discussion around making it culturally or religiously lined up or aligned. And I think that's really powerful, because there's, again, so much shame and fear around this kind of work and this kind of discussion. And then if you can make it so that it matches what people believe and their belief system, their culture, that's going to make it easier for them to hear you, versus like, not only do I have to deal with the shame of talking about this, but I have to translate it through different cultural perspectives. Right.
It's like there's more barriers to cross when you don't have those little tools and practical skills to do that. And so that's what we're hoping we'll be able to share at the summit.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to hear your talk. That sounds so powerful. Can you give us an example? I know I don't want to have you violate anybody's confidentiality, but can you give me an example of a time someone came in and really was touched by the way you're teaching this?
Yeah, it's interesting how when we do in-person workshops and trainings, we'll always get anonymous comments on evaluation surveys, or we'll get social media reach outs as well. And so recently, I believe we had someone reach out, and it was featured in a recent NPR article on our work, but he's a survivor of sexual abuse from with his family, and had kind of kept it within himself for many years, attended a workshop by the staff member in Los Angeles and found a comfort and reached out, and then just said, like, didn't realize that this space existed, didn't realize that there was an organization being able to create safe spaces, not only to be heard, but to potentially connect with resources. And from a spiritual perspective too, as you can imagine, I've read that sexual abuse is a lot like soul murder in some cases when it's a religious, when there's a religious affiliation, right? So being able to have someone there for you to hold space and to be able to understand that and not judge for any, questioning you have or disenchantment with the faith tradition, I think is really powerful. And so that's one powerful example of what we've heard folks who've attended say about our work.
Oh wow, that's mine abuse wasn't religiously based, but I can understand. I did have confusion because I was told if I was a good girl, I went to, I guess Protestant, I don't know, whatever they took me to, but they were telling us if we were good, bad things wouldn't happen if we prayed and all that. And I remember praying and thinking, I'm trying to be good. I don't understand why this is still happening. But if it's also within the context of a religious, there's a connection there, that would be even more confusing. Like, how do I hold that? So I love that you were able to give that person some sense of safety and understanding.
Absolutely, and hopefully more individuals like that are able to reach out, even virtually. That happens sometimes too, not necessarily in person.
Have you found that your title is Religious Tradition and Sexual Violence? Have you found that does teaching within that context of their religious tradition, does that reduce sexual violence? Does it help people, you said it helps them understand faster, but does it, have you found that that's had an impact on sexual violence? Reducing that?
So that's a really good question, and I think it would be hard to answer, but
how do you separate that out?
Well, yeah, so knowing that the root of all sexual violence is power and control, I think some people, those who are perpetrators, are vastly unaware of how they misuse and abuse religion to gain power and to keep control, right? So I think they're in need of more enlightenment than a workshop. Mm-hmm. I think they're in need of severe sorts of intervention and therapy that's beyond what we can really offer. Our work is more around the victim blaming that goes on within our community. So how people are misunderstanding what is religion when it's actually patriarchal garbage, if I may.
Thank you, that's so amazing.
So, Islam has been misinterpreted and mistranslated by certain segments of the Middle East, and a lot of religious education comes from certain sects of that area. Yeah. And so passed down through many men, for example, it's just led to more victim blaming and misconstruing modesty for basically giving permission that if a woman is not modest, she's a victim or potential victim of sexual violence. So we are completely debunking that. There's a lot of verses and religious texts that completely debunk that. So not so much the perpetrator side, but the victim blaming, right? So isolation from the community, victims not knowing where to go. Yeah. That's where we're seeing a large impact. Yeah. And we have a lot more female scholars coming out with literature about this, and it's incredible to see that happening. Oh,
I'm so glad and I think there's a certain amount of victim blaming. Oppressors or violators don't often want to see themselves as that, so it's a tendency to blame the victim. But then when if they start using religion to justify it, I remember reading the Quran. I guess it was a decade ago, and I know there's many nuances I didn't understand, but it was so beautiful, and I was like, this is not at all what I thought I'd get from the book, from the teachings in there.
Right. It's easy in any faith tradition to cut and paste, so-called, to make it justify your actions. Yes. And I think it can be done with any religion. Mm-hmm. But what I noticed with the Islamophobia you mentioned is more people do that with Islam than other faith traditions. And I think media has led to that and allowed that to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of fear-mongering, and I'm like, there's as many Christians that are doing horrible things, probably more than a lot of other religions, and yet we focus in on, let's make them the bad guys so we don't have to actually deal with the issue.
Right.
So, wow, I love that you're doing this work. Why did you decide on Woodhull as a place to present this?
Yeah, so we are constantly looking for innovative forums to share our work. Mm-hmm. And given that Woodhull's mission is sexual freedom, and the current landscape of the intersections of Islam and politics and gender violence, we thought, wow, what a way to put a spin on the work we do by talking about it from a sexual freedom perspective, rather than having to always be defensive in our narrative, right? Always having to try and change people's mind by having to shut down Islamophobia, which we will in this presentation, but we're completely taking it from a sex positive framework, which we find more empowering as well, and more positive, given that a lot of sex ed, like you said, when it's done, it's so shameful, it's very fear mongering, it's not empowered abstinence based, for example, it's shame filled and fear based. So we're excited for this forum because it lends to that positive tone, and I think we're excited to learn from the forum as well. So we love connecting with other folks in the field and kind of learning from them and making sure that our sex ed is very up to date and evidence based as well.
Yeah, it's a great. I go back. I've been going through this is my 8th year because it's a great place to recharge and network and find out the latest, because we're evolving. Our understanding is growing more nuanced and more powerful, and just immersing yourself for a couple days and people that are really diving into this work. I always leave recharged and ready to go out there and do stuff.
And that's exciting. And I think as practitioners, we all need that space to be in a bubble for a couple of days, soak it in, and then, okay, now let's get back to the real world and take what I learned and implement it, hopefully.
Yeah. I'm so touched by what you're doing, and it's so beautiful. Is there anything you'd like to leave people with, thought, or to wrap up the interview, like for people that wanted to know more? Is there a place they can go, or?
Yeah, so we do have a pretty active social media presence. So heartwomenandgirls.org is our website. We recently started doing more sex ed virtually using Instagram and Facebook.
Nice.
So you can find us there. Instagram, we're Heart to Grow. So we believe the heart is actually an acronym. A lot of people think cardiac health, but it's health education, advocacy, research, and training.
Oh, nice.
So those are the 4 arms of our work. So we encourage people to reach out, and we're really excited to connect with folks at the summit. And we always get folks wanting us to come out and do more trainings, which is really exciting. Yeah. So we're looking forward to that.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm excited. I love that you're out there making this difference for people. So.
Well, I appreciate you, and also the platform you're offering. I think having allies is really important in this work, as you know. It can feel isolating sometimes, but knowing that there are other folks out there doing the work is really helpful.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you at Woodhull very soon.
Thank you, us as well. We'll see you in just over a month.
It's coming up fast.
Yeah, it's coming up fast.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.